Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of our podcast, Trinis Abroad. In this episode, we're going to discuss the one thing that faces each and every Canadian and every immigrant, the cost of living in Canada. That's why today's episode is entitled From Rent to Taxes, the True Cost of Canada.
There are various costs you need to consider, from housing to healthcare, money to education, and everything else in between. For our first question, how did we approach housing when we first arrived? Renting versus buying.
We actually started looking for housing before moving to Canada because we contacted a real estate agent and we were able to look around for the various costs that were attached to renting, as well as if you want to purchase a home in Canada, there are certain requirements. Not each and every person could purchase a home. You need to be a permanent resident, you need to be a citizen. You can look up the requirements because they often change. So foreign citizens are not eligible to purchase a home at this point in time. So right now we're actually renting, and we have been renting for the past 5 years. Renting is expensive. We live in Mississauga, which is in the GTA, and the average rent goes from 2,000 to 3,000 Canadian per month. This also varies and goes up if you go closer to Toronto, the major cities. The cost may go down in various cities that are underpopulated and are far away from these major cities. The average cost of a home right now in Mississauga and in the GTA varies from 800,000 to 1.4 million Canadian dollars. There are certain requirements in order to be eligible to purchase a home. I've done various videos on my TikTok channel. You can feel free to check it out. As I said, it's very expensive, and these are the different costs that you need to consider. And these were the conversations we were having with our real estate agent before moving to Canada, because obviously we needed to budget.
One of the biggest factors in determining your eligibility to purchase a home in Canada is that of credit history. And coming from Trinidad, or if you come from anywhere else in the Caribbean, you would know that credit history is not a thing. And that takes time to develop and doesn't happen overnight. You need to be worthy to a lender for the mortgage, and that can only happen over time. Whether you're renting or you're buying, there are different modes of housing to consider. So there are apartments, there are condos, there are townhouses, there are semi-detached houses, there are detached houses. And each mode of housing represents a different cost, and as well it varies from city to city. So the major cities like downtown Toronto, Vancouver, they would be more expensive compared to if you're living in the suburban areas. So our housing journey was a little bit different. So we arrived here during COVID. We started the process of looking for housing while we were still in Trinidad. We were able to get in contact with a realtor. However, upon advice, we were informed that we had to actually wait till we were physically in Canada to actually start looking around for housing, as there was not much that could have been done as we were still in Trinidad. Because it was COVID, we were in quarantine for 2 weeks, so we still had a delay because we couldn't do anything in those 2 weeks. We couldn't tour any housing, so we had to wait till we left quarantine to actually start looking for housing. And at that time, we were temporarily staying in a hotel for about 2 weeks. And what we thought would have been, a smooth process to be able to secure housing within those 2 weeks ended up turning into a 30-day search for housing. What we slowly realized is that, you may look at a particular housing, whether it's an apartment, a house for rent, and a lot of times you would think you may want to sleep on it, and what would happen is the next day it would be taken completely. And that's what happened to us. We probably looked at about over 20 plus different properties, but we kept losing them because people kept taking them. And as we were new immigrants, we didn't have that credit history, so it further delayed our process in getting a rental. And eventually after the first 30 days, we were finally able to secure our first rental home. But it was challenging being a new immigrant coming here with no credit history.
So on getting this rental property, the landlord actually asked for 6 months rent upfront, something that wasn't really a shock to us because we knew this from the conversations with our realtor from back in Trinidad. So again, it's really good to do your research and have these conversations before you move. So we actually knew a couple Trinis who migrated around the same time with us, and they too were also asked to pay several months or 6 months advance rent upfront, and that was something that was, I don't think it's special to that time, and that's something you need to consider. Really budget and have these conversations to be prepared. On to question number 2. What financial lessons have we learned since moving here?
I would say the biggest lesson that we learned upon arriving and initially securing housing is how many additional costs that you have to now think about and allocate when you secure housing for the first time. So it's not like in Trinidad where you are renting and maybe the place comes semi-furnished or fully furnished, and then typically maybe utilities are included. Here in Canada, depending on the type of housing, so let's say if you are renting a house or even a semi-detached house, those costs are not included. So typically you have to pay utilities separately. In Canada, because we go through the different seasons, we actually have a cost for heating, especially during the winter. And then most rental properties do not come furnished. So that's something you have to budget for, to have allocated costs for furnishing your home.
So all of these things were being planned while we were in Trinidad. I actually had an Excel sheet of all the different costs attached to furnishing a home. So I was on IKEA's website looking up the cost of TVs, what's the cost of furniture, chairs, couches. So these are the different costs that you need to consider because they don't come furnished. So the most that rental properties come with is a fridge, stove, washer, dryer, and a dishwasher. So these are the things that we needed to really plan, like the cost of our TV, furniture, and these are the different items that we needed to consider before moving here. In Canada, we have different utilities compared to Trinidad, and these were the conversations that we were having with our realtor. I was like, ooh, what can I budget per month in terms of utilities? And the ballpark figure is between 300 to 400 Canadian per month, and we can get into that later, but these were the different costs that adds up, right? And you need to budget for. Don't think it's just you're paying for the light bill or the water bill is different here, right? Because you have to consider heating, gas, and electricity. Each and every landlord requires you to have home insurance. So that's something you need to present to them before you actually get the rental property acquired. So you have to show proof of that. And this is a monthly fee that you pay every month on top of all the other utilities that you foot. So this is something that you need to consider, and obviously you reach out to different insurance agents and you can get quotes. But it's always good to shop around, and I recommend that you look into getting a broker. The broker actually looks for you and helps you acquire the best rate for your area, because obviously it varies between areas and it's insurance, right? So it depends on coverage. So these are the different costs that you will need to consider. And one more thing I want to add is that if you actually do purchase a home, you have to actually pay property tax. Property tax is a yearly fee. I know that Trinidadians are fighting against property tax, but property tax is a thing here, and it's a yearly fee, and it's something that you must pay if you buy a home, if you purchase a home. People who are renting don't need to pay property tax. It's really the landlord responsibility. So another lesson that we learned since moving to Canada was grocery prices. So generally in Trinidad, there's a few groceries that we tend to go to, the big box grocery stores. But in Canada, there's a lot of grocery stores in our area, at least, because we live in the GTA. So what we did is actually start shopping around, looking for prices, and obviously different groceries have different things. So we're actually looking around to see, yes, best prices, but we're actually looking to see if they had what we wanted in terms of our diet. So we're looking at produce, we're looking at poultry, we're looking at different things. So these are things that you could need to consider when budgeting your groceries. Also to look into price matching. Price matching is actually not available in all grocery stores, but only participating grocery stores. So they actually see if you get one item and you see that exact item somewhere else and it's at a lower cost, they're actually going to give you that at the lower cost. Very beneficial to us, and we do that all the time weekly in our grocery spending.
The biggest financial lesson being a new immigrant to Canada is learning that there's something called sales tax. So unlike in Trinidad, depending on the item that you want to purchase, the price on the price tag is the exact price that you're paying at the checkout. In Canada, each province has varying sales tax, and Ontario has 13% sales tax. So, what that means is, let's say that you're buying clothing and the price tag says it's $20. You're not actually paying $20, you're paying $20 plus 13% tax when you check out. And that's a big shock if you're not aware of what the cost of goods and services cost in Canada. And it doesn't just apply to tangible items, so it also applies to certain services as well. So let's say you're going to do personal care services or any other type of services, they would typically add on 13% tax. So that's something that you have to get adjusted to. Again, it does vary by province, so I would recommend definitely do your research to determine if you're able to even afford the cost of living in that province, because you always need to consider you're paying 13% extra. Another major financial lesson that you would learn as a new immigrant is the different income tax deductions. When you get your first paycheck, you might be super excited thinking like, oh yeah, I got a lot of money and I can now spend it. But when you really look at your paycheck, you'll be blown away like we were when we saw how many deductions came out of it. So unlike in Trinidad, you may have certain flat taxes that you have to pay. In Canada, and then in each province, there are varying taxes. So in terms of salary, at least in Ontario, there are approximately 4 deductions that are mandatory. So everyone in Canada has to pay federal taxes. Depending on the province, you also need to pay additional provincial taxes. You also have to make mandatory contributions to what we call the Canada Pension Plan, or the CPP, which goes towards your retirement income. And then the fourth deduction in your salary is something called employment insurance in the event you lose your job. And those are the 4 mandatory ones, not including additional deductions. So some companies do give what is called RRSP. RRSP means Registered Retirement Savings Plan, as well as companies will also make deductions for health insurance as well as even for disability. So when you really calculate what your net income is after all of those deductions and the mandatory income taxes, sometimes it doesn't really amount to what you thought you would have been able to take home in terms of net cash. And that's a big difference leaving Trinidad, because no matter what you make in Trinidad, there would probably be some flat rates. The other thing to consider is that in Canada, there are different tax brackets for different levels of income. So generally, the higher income you make, you are taxed more than a middle class or low income person. Whereas in Trinidad, it usually is a flat rate. So that's just something to consider.
Also, too, I want to add to that in terms of the tax brackets, it's actually you actually tax more the higher the salary or the gross income you make annually. So sometimes you may actually get a raise and you may move up into another tax bracket. And because you're going to be taxed more, your net take home after tax may be less than before you got the raise. So think about that. Does it really make sense getting a raise and you're just moving into another tax bracket? It may look attractive, but does it outweigh the taxes? So that's something you need to consider, and that's something that myself and Anthony, we do consider whether we want to go into different tax brackets.
All right, moving on to the next question. What is the cost for transit?
Well, here in Canada, there's different forms of transit. So there's buses, trains, subway. There's also inter-province trains. There's also cars, Uber. You could drive for yourself. You could take taxis. There are a lot of different transit options that are available here. You could even travel between provinces with a plane. So you actually take a plane and you go to different provinces. You could actually take a plane to go within the same province. That's how huge Canada is. But obviously everything comes at a cost. So if you are taking up a job or you got a job offer in like one of the major cities, traveling to these major cities may be a burden because going to these cities, a lot of people go in and out of these cities daily in terms of commuting, in terms of for their jobs. When we are going into Toronto, because we live on the outskirts of Toronto, when we're going into Toronto, we actually have to balance whether we want to drive or not, and we actually have the option of taking the train. The train for us to go to Toronto is much more efficient than actually driving to Toronto. Driving in Toronto may take you 45 minutes to 1 hour, but if you take the train, it's 25 minutes. So that's something that is more cost effective for us. Also, to what we realize is like if you actually take the train and you park your car at the train station, it's free parking. Like if I were to drive to go to Toronto and I want to park my car, I've looked at the rates. It's like $25 to $35 per night if you want to stay in like one of the hotels or you want to stay overnight or overnight parking or even a daily rate to park in Toronto. It could be expensive. So if you get a job opportunity to go to Toronto, these daily rates could go up depending on your commute times as well as the cost to park in Toronto and as well as gas, obviously, because if you want to drive. So these are the things you need to consider when transiting in and around Canada.
As we're on the topic of transit, let's talk about the cost when you have a car. And the biggest financial challenge for anyone who has a car is the cost of gas. Unlike in Trinidad, where gas is subsidized by the government and it is a flat rate no matter the gas station, no matter the time of day, no matter the month, until probably the following year when it is time for budget. In Canada, it varies by each province. The cost of gas also varies by each gas station. It even varies and it changes throughout the day. So there are some parts of the day when gas is actually cheaper, such as in the morning time, or there are some times when it is cheapest in the evening. So it's something you have to be mindful of and do your research and figure out which gas stations you want to put or fill up in gas. And as well, it does vary from seasons to season. So in some seasons, it might be less costly versus in other seasons, it's more expensive. So that is a huge factor when having a car. Currently, the price of gas as of, I believe, yesterday, at least in Ontario, at least in the GTA where we live, it was about 119.4 cents per liter. The highest it ever went was around, I would say, a little over 200. But when we first arrived during COVID, it was very cheap. And then obviously with COVID, it just skyrocketed. And then luckily for us in Ontario, the government did decide to subsidize the cost. So what we're paying right now is technically cheaper. But that's something you have to also budget for. It's not going to be a fixed cost every week. So it's something to keep in mind. And depending on your commute, depending on where your job is, or depending on some of your activities or places you need to visit, there are times when you may need to fill your gas even more than once a week. And unlike in Trinidad, one of the biggest things that I found or differences is that the price of diesel here is actually significantly higher. In Trinidad, it is the opposite. I remember the price of diesel would be less expensive than the regular super gas. In Canada, it's like, at least in Ontario, it's like the opposite. It's crazy expensive. So it's something to keep in mind, especially when you're trying to figure out what type of car you want to purchase or lease.
Also, too, when purchasing a car, you have to purchase car insurance. And from my personal experience and our personal experience, the cost that you pay in Trinidad, I remember paying like between 1,000 to 1,200 Trinidadian per year. I think I pay more than that per month from just from my car. So that's something that is way different and is way costly here. Also, too, when you go to the gas station and you want to put air in your tire, it's free in Trinidad. Here, you have to pay $2 per couple minutes. In terms of changing a tire or maintenance fees, you have to purchase snow tires here in the different the colder months, in winter obviously, and depending on the different province that you are in. Also too, I realized that the maintenance fees for cars here are way more expensive than Trinidad. If you have to change a tire, it's like 60 to 80, 100 Canadian to change one tire. Yeah, so that's the different thing that you need to consider, and you need to shop around. There's a lot of availability of services here, and a lot of things that are way more expensive than Trinidad. If you're thinking of purchasing a car, is also the option of leasing one. I don't think a lot of places in Trinidad offer this service. I know that a few do. So leasing a car is basically a long-term rental, and you have it for like 4 to 5 years. And here you could only lease new cars. You can't lease on used car. There are a lot of cars here, and I realize the cost of a car, like a used car, is way cheaper compared to Trinidad, in my opinion, because we get cars from the US, we get cars from Canada. You can get a variety of cars, but as I said, the maintenance fees for these cars can go up, and sometimes maintaining your car may be more costly than purchasing a car. So that's something you need to consider as well. Weigh the options, whether you want to lease, buy, or even long-term finance. So that's the different options that are available to you if you want to purchase a car. Okay, so now on to question number 4. What has been our experience with the healthcare system?
So, Canada is known for having universal or free healthcare. However, it is not free for every individual. It is free only if you're a permanent resident or citizen. It could also be partially funded or free to students as well, depending on the universities that you are registered with. And each province also has its own provincial healthcare program. So in Ontario, we have what's called the Ontario Health Insurance Plan, or what we call OHIP. So it is a health card that you get as a new resident or Canadian citizen, and this gives you access to free healthcare. So the way in which the health card works, at least in Ontario, it is funded and paid for by the taxes that we do incur. So even though Canada on a whole may have very high taxes, it does go directly back into these services. So you find that with healthcare, at least in Ontario, you're able to visit a doctor and you don't have to pay any fees. You're able to go to the hospital if you have any overnight stays, you have to get any surgeries, if you have to do any special tests such as like x-rays, blood work, all of that is free and it is covered under the provincial healthcare plan. Now, the province's healthcare program does not cover prescriptions, and that's why it is still very important as a new immigrant to have private health insurance. I highly recommend that. Even if you're not employed, you can look around at various different agencies and providers to get private health insurance. So when we first arrived to Canada, as we have mentioned in earlier episodes, it was COVID. And because it was COVID, we had a little bit of difficulty in finding a family doctor. We actually were unable to find a family doctor within the first year. I remember calling around to various different clinics just to get information, and everyone was fully booked. They were not accepting new patients just because it was COVID, obviously. So it actually took us at least about almost a year and a half to find our first family doctor. And the way in which we found this is through the Ontario Healthcare Connect program. So the Ontario Healthcare Connect program is a free provincial program where basically if you don't have a family doctor, based on the location that you reside in, the providers will help find a family doctor for you and your family, depending on who's accepting new patients. And that's exactly what I did. I basically signed up, and one of the major requirements is that you need to have your, what we call the OHIP card, which is the Ontario Health Insurance Plan, in order to be eligible. However, there was very long waiting times for us to be able to get an appointment with our first family doctor. It took several months, and that is usually the norm, especially if you're a new immigrant. But as well, it was further compounded that it was COVID. So it did take us several months to finally book in a checkup. I also did look around to get other referrals. We did ended up finding another family doctor some shortly after through referrals. So what I would recommend is if you have any relatives in Canada within the province that you're residing in, you can also ask them for a referral from maybe their family doctor. If you're not successful that way, then you can try the Ontario Healthcare Connect program. Biggest challenge with the healthcare system in Canada, or at least Ontario, is the severely long wait. I found not just in trying to get a family doctor took a long period of time, but let's say if you need to see a specialist, you need to first get a referral from your family doctor, and then they put you on a wait list because there's a shortage of specialists in Canada for certain specialties. And I remember both of us, we had to see certain specialists, in the course of the 5 years we've been here. And upon getting the referral from our family doctor, we were informed that we had to wait 6 months just to be able to set the appointment up with the specialist. And I remember just thinking, like, that's just insane, because in Trinidad, I never had any issues if I had to see a specialist for anything. Normally, I would get the referral from the doctor and we were able to book in an appointment relatively quickly. But that's the reality here in Canada. Be prepared for severely long wait times if you need to see a specialist, or even if you need urgent care.
So on the other hand, eye care is not covered here, eye exams, and only in special cases, like if it's for health reasons and for medical reasons, if you get unfortunate accidents and stuff. Dental isn't covered here as well, only in certain cases for low-income families. Dental here and eye care here, as in our opinion, is very expensive, maybe triple the cost compared to Trinidad. The thing is, here's I don't know why it's so expensive, but it's honestly, you need to get health insurance, private health insurance, in order to cover these bills. We had to take out our wisdom teeth out a couple years ago, both of us, and it was thousands of Canadian. Yes, that was the bill. But luckily, we had private health insurance, and we also had health insurance with our employers, so that was able to help foot the bill. But honestly, here it's way more expensive, and even like general checkups and cleanings and fillings and stuff are triple the cost, quadruple the cost compared to Trinidad. In terms of prescriptions, we are fortunate enough to have private health insurance with our employers, as I said. With us together combined, they do cover a lot of the prescriptions that we get. So as Anthony mentioned, it does take some time to get a family doctor. I guess it was our bad luck during COVID. But now, as we have a family doctor, any issues, we actually call our family doctor and our specialists, and we actually get treated within the same week, or even the next day, or even the same day if we're lucky enough. Even if you're doing blood tests or even any kind of examination that they will tend to do, you get the results within 2 days. So that's something that you have the benefit of here. We could call our doctor, they give us phone support anytime, but it's really the hassle of getting one in the first place, and obviously getting a good one, because the first time we didn't actually like our experience and we actually switched doctors, and the doctor that we have right now, yes, it's nearby, and then honestly it really helps us out. We really like the service, and it's something that you need to look around for, just as any other service. Also, too, there are walk-in clinics. If you don't have a family doctor, if you don't have a specialist assigned to you, these walk-in clinics, you just have to show them your OHIP card and it's covered. Obviously, the prescriptions are not covered, but that's the visits, the checkups, whatever ailment that you have, and you want to get, let's say you have the cold, you could just walk into these clinics. The thing is, wait times are a bit extensive. You have to line up with the general public, but rather than having a family doctor where you get specialized treatment. Also, too, in terms of tests and results, in Trinidad, I've remembered doing a blood test and it takes a couple weeks, maybe a month to get results, maybe 2 months in the unfortunate cases. But here, if you go to my family doctor, even in the walk-in clinic, you get your results within a couple days. So that's something that I like about this system. It's very efficient and it's readily available. There's a lot of them. It's just like the waiting times if you're in the general public. But if you have a family doctor assigned to you, or even a specialist, you call them, you make an appointment, you go in and you get treated almost immediately, and you get your results in a very timely fashion.
All right, for the final question, how does the cost of living compare to Trinidad?
Well, honestly, you can't really compare because you're not comparing like for like in this case. The cost does vary, and there's also pros and cons attached to them. So for instance, here there's higher taxes, but you actually see your taxpayers' money going into use into the communities, police system, schools, roads. You don't have bad roads here. The transportation systems, healthcare. You see your money from what is being deducted from you. In Trinidad, sad to say that sometimes you may have that doubt whether you're paying all these taxes and you're seeing reaping the rewards from them. So I won't say you could compare. There's a lot of benefits in Trinidad and there's a lot of benefits in Canada. So that's where you need to weigh the different options and you need to see which one is suitable. The cost of living here is relatively higher compared to Trinidad, but you have a lot of things that you don't have to worry about in Trinidad. You see where your money is going into, and there's a lot of variety. You have access to a lot of different things to help your life become better. So in Canada, there's a lot more services available at your disposal. You could get access to a lot of different things here, and if you want to compare to Trinidad, you shouldn't really compare because a lot of people say that Canada is better or Trinidad is better in certain instances because they have experienced both of them. But I will always comment and say it can't compare because it's totally different.
When looking at cost as well, I would say that yes, the taxes are higher in Canada, but I find that also has a negative connotation in Canada because with higher taxes, it means that you have less disposable income. Versus in Trinidad, I found it was almost the opposite because taxes aren't as high. So you'd find you have a little bit more disposable income. And then another major factor is in Canada, a lot of younger persons, once they turn 18, they move out and they start renting. Versus in Trinidad, a lot of persons still live at home with their family. So they're not paying rent, they don't have to worry about mortgage and all these other bills that they would have to incur if they were living on their own. What I would say on a positive note is a lot of younger Canadians, because they start working at an earlier age, they're able to save at an earlier age and they're able to sustain themselves, and that's why they're able to rent at an earlier age. And because they've been saving for a long period of time, they can eventually save up enough income to purchase their first home. So I find that Canadians are a little bit more independent. They are very much about the hustle and the grind, and they work hard for their money to save for the future. Living in Canada for the past 5 years and seeing what the system is like and understanding finances and understanding taxes is that you have to learn to be financially smart when you move to Canada. You'll learn very quickly how fast money almost disappears after you get paid from all the deductions and the high taxes. So you really need to budget and plan accordingly, especially if you want to maximize your savings. What I find a lot of Canadians do as well in order to have savings is that, let's say you're renting, sometimes you may have a roommate to help split the costs. A lot of persons as well who live in houses, they rent their basements out to help offset maybe their mortgage that they may have to pay for, or even the property taxes that they have to pay for annually. So those are different financial strategies that a lot of persons do in Canada.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Trinis Abroad, where we discuss the different costs attached to living here in Canada. Yes, it is expensive, but you need to be financially responsible and spend wisely. So thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment to our YouTube channel. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Spotify. And lastly, please follow our Instagram page dedicated to Trinis Abroad. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.